Space sims live and die by their flight models, and Hunternet Starfighter is pushing into new territory with a recently added aerodynamic flight model. They're also expanded into an entirely new mining system, which is pretty unique for space games, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, traditionally, Hunternet's flight model has been fully Newtonian with 6 degrees of freedom, as well as optional flight assist, complete with G-force blackouts and hardcore FA off. But the developers wanted to add some additional options here as well, and therefore introduced atmospheric effects for atmospheric flight, and this fundamentally changes how starfighters handle when within gravity and in air. Ultimately, this means that when you take your nimble starfighter into a planet's atmosphere, for example Jupiter's upper atmosphere at the Harvester Station, you'll feel drag, lift and gravity affecting every manoeuvre. What does this actually entail for gameplay? Well, in practice, atmospheric flight in Hunternet Starfighter requires more finesse. Ships have full thruster control, but the presence of air introduces resistance and a sense of weight. Tight turns and high G-force maneuvers become even riskier as pilots fight both the enemy craft and the environment itself. And in the new model, if you yank your starfighter too hard into a bank, you can expect to bleed speed and possibly black out from the G-forces, much like in a modern jet fighter. Essentially what's going on here then is that dogfighting in an atmosphere rewards technique closer to atmospheric dogfights, where managing your energy and angle of attack is crucial. It's a nice contrast to the pure vacuum of combat that you'll have in space. So yeah, the game has the best of both worlds. Other space sims of course have toyed with atmospheric flight to different degrees, but Hunternet's approach stands out in contrast. Elite Dangerous, for example, only models drag, and in very thin atmospheres there's no full atmospheric planets here, so full aerodynamics never really come into play on the airless moons that commanders typically visit. Star Citizen, on the other hand, does simulate atmospheric lift and drag, forcing pilots to adjust to each planet's gravity and air density. Hunternet Starfighter then does follow more in Star Citizen's footsteps here. It brings believable flight physics into play, but on a smaller scale compared to what we see in Star Citizen. Here, everything is much tighter knit and focused on combat and the overall game model. The footage you can see on screen right here is taken from a recent development update from the developer from the studios, where they are basically demonstrating how all of this works. It's also interesting to hear that not only have they remodeled the flight physics for the ships themselves, but also for the game's missiles. For this, there's a new model. Both short and long-range missiles now gain a proper aero support so that they track targets consistently in atmosphere versus the vacuum. It's quite a different experience from what I can tell here just by watching the footage. The second major feature on the horizon for Hunternet Starfighter is the initial implementation of asteroid mining. But don't expect a tranquil spacefaring mining sim here. True to its action combat focus, Hunternet's take on mining is fast, dangerous and skill based. Now, we've seen a lot of different versions of mining throughout the years when it comes to space games, from the what you might recall the pretty epic and slow rotating rocks of Elite Dangerous, which then explode. Fantastic explosions actually in the deep core mining, or the more peaceful and tranquil mining of EVE Online. In Hunternet Starfighter, things are not static. The asteroids rotate, they spin, they move, and they glide off each other, and ultimately if they hit hard enough, they do explode and pull apart. The developer's vision here is of mining zones that are as white-knuckle as dogfighting, colossal rocks tumbling unpredictably, sometimes smashing into each other, and anyone foolish enough to get caught in between, you don't want to be doing that. So yeah, dynamic asteroid physics systems means that mining becomes a test of a piloting skill. Here, you're going to need to thread your ships through the moving hazards and timing your approach to avoid getting crushed. The gameplay itself is still in the early development stages and is being fleshed out as we speak. What we can see on screen here is essentially a work in progress. It gives us an idea of how this might all be working. Of course, with the asteroid zones and mining zones like this as high stakes games, very dangerous zones, of course it's second nature that the developers would also want to make these combat zones. So yes, you can fight in these, and that really does up the ante, it ups the stakes. Ultimately then, mining is high risk, it's a high skill activity, and Hunternet Starfighter is weaving this mechanic directly into its gameplay loop. It's described as the whole essential gameplay that we got here in Hunternet Starfighter, which is a cycle of mine, build and conquer, a cycle of the game's persistent universe. It's a very different philosophy to what we've seen in games like Star Citizen or Elite Dangerous, where mining is usually a solitary money-making career. In Hunternet, every chunk of ore could be fuel for a war effort. So yeah, you're going to be need to be a highly capable pilot in order to mine. So these new features, they beg the question, what kind of universe is Hunternet Starfighter building and where's it all going? We know it's a world where atmospheric dogfights and hazardous mining missions make sense, all are side by side. It's a game in which the setting is, ambitious. It is a persistent MMO-style war setting that takes place during a great civil war, and it's fought between two different factions, the Earth Alliance and the United Colonies. It's a conflict that forms the backdrop for every player's actions. Now the game is still in a pretty early development. It's actually looking pretty good. You can get access to it at the moment if you want extremely early access. You can do this via the Hunternet Starfighter website. There you'll find they do a regular playtest which you can participate in and get involved in. But if you want to wait a little bit longer, the full-on early access will be available on Steam at some point in the future, and you can check out the Steam website. Actually, I'll make sure to link both the Steam website and the Hunternet Starfighter website in the video description. So essentially then, as of today, as of right now, Hunternet Starfighter is in a playable alpha state. The core combat is up and running and players can dogfight in space or in the new atmospheric environments. They can also race and practice in the academy, and they can salvage battle wrecks as well for resources. Some persistent elements are partially what's going on today? Some persistent elements are partially implemented. For example, there's a framework for resource collection and a limited faction of fleet supply that can be exhausted in matches. However, the full persistent war, with its territory control and continuous strategic layer, is not yet fully unleashed to the public. We're going to have to be waiting a bit longer for that. One way of looking at it then is that what's available right now is a slice of the overall game that's ultimately going to be released at some point. So I've visited Hunternet Starfighter a few times over the years, and each time I check in, it does seem to be making really nice progress with nice additional gameplay added on every single time. I'm curious to see how this is all going to play out once it eventually hits Steam Early Access. Things are going to be pretty high stakes for the developers here, but ultimately I think they've got things locked down. They definitely know at least in which direction they're trying to head, and they've pretty proven the model here as they go. At any rate, do check out those links in the video description if you want to know more. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.